I have managed luxury properties for 27 years. Penthouses in Monaco, estates in the Hamptons, compounds that cost more than small countries' GDP. But what happened in Harbour during the spring of 2019 still makes me check every mirror twice before turning my back. The Castellanos family had owned the 42nd floor penthouse at the Oceania for 3 generations. When Sebastian Castellanos inherited it that March, he hired me to oversee what he called the transition period. The old patriarch had died in February, leaving behind a property worth $38 million and instructions that seemed excessive even by billionaire standards. The first peculiarity was the master bedroom mirror, a massive piece, 7 feet tall, framed in what appeared to be genuine 18th century Venetian silver. It was mounted directly into the wall with steel brackets, anchored so deeply that removing it would require demolishing half the room. Sebastian had mentioned it specifically during our initial meeting. That mirror stays exactly where it is, he said, avoiding eye contact. My grandfather's will was very clear about that. It faces the bed. It will always face the bed. I found this odd, considering the mirror was positioned at an awkward angle, reflecting only the bedroom's eastern corner where no one would typically stand. But wealthy families have their eccentricities, and I've learned not to question inherited arrangements. The mirror remained properly positioned for 3 weeks. Then, on the morning of April 15th, I arrived at precisely 8:30 to find it had turned 90 degrees clockwise during the night. It now faced the hallway door, reflecting whoever entered the room. The maintenance team swore they hadn't touched it. The building's security footage showed no one entering the penthouse between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. The steel brackets remained firmly mounted, showing no signs of loosening or tampering. Yet somehow, 500 pounds of mirror and frame had rotated on an axis that shouldn't exist. I called Sebastian immediately. His voice carried a tremor I hadn't noticed before. "Turn it back," he said. "Use whatever crew you need. Just turn it back to face the bed." The restoration took 4 hours and 6 men. We had to partially dismantle the mounting system to rotate the mirror to its original position. The workers commented on how the brackets seemed designed to allow rotation, though the building's architect insisted no such mechanism existed in the original plans. That afternoon, I conducted a thorough inspection of the penthouse. The Castellanos family had maintained detailed records. Every renovation, every piece moved or replaced. Every modification dating back to 1987, when they first purchased the property. The mirror appeared in photographs from the very beginning, always facing the bed, always in the exact same position. I found the grandfather's personal notes in a leather portfolio left in the study. His handwriting was meticulous, recording daily observations about the property's condition. The final entry, dated February 3rd, 2 days before his death, contained a single line that made my hands shake. The mirror knows. It always knows when change is coming. Sebastian arrived that evening with his wife Elena and their twin daughters, both 8 years old. The family had been living in their primary residence in Greenwich while the inheritance paperwork was processed. This was their first night sleeping in the penthouse since the patriarch's death. I briefed Sebastian about the mirror situation, showing him the mounting analysis and security reports. He listened carefully, then asked a question that surprised me. "Has it happened before?" "The turning." I told him this was the first incident since I'd started managing the property. His expression suggested he wasn't surprised by the mirror's behavior, only by my surprise at witnessing it. "My grandfather mentioned certain irregularities in his later years," Sebastian said carefully. "He was 93 when he died. We assumed it was confusion, perhaps early dementia, but he kept very detailed journals. That night, I stayed in the penthouse's staff quarters to monitor the situation. Sebastian had installed cameras specifically focused on the mirror, in addition to the building's standard security system. If it moved again, we would have documentation. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I was awakened by Elena's voice in the hallway. She was speaking softly, as if trying not to wake the children. I heard her say, "I know you're there. I can see you." When I reached the master bedroom, I found her standing in the doorway, staring at the mirror. It had turned again during the night, but this time, instead of facing the hallway, it was angled toward the children's bedroom. Elna stood frozen, her silk nightgown reflecting the Miami skyline's lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The mirror's surface seemed to shimmer differently than normal glass, creating depths that shouldn't exist in a simple reflection. Mrs. Castellanos, I whispered, not wanting to startle her. What do you see? My father-in-law, she said without turning around. He's standing behind us in the mirror. But when I turn around, the hallway is empty. I looked at the mirror's surface. I saw only Elena and myself, the hallway behind us exactly as it appeared in reality. But Elena continued staring with the fixed intensity of someone witnessing something impossible. Sebastian appeared, wearing a robe over his pajamas. His face was pale, resigned. It's starting again, he said quietly. It's just like when I was a child. What's starting? I asked. The mirror doesn't just turn, Sebastian explained. It shows things. People who aren't there anymore. My grandfather claimed he could see his own father in it, and his grandfather before that. 3 generations of Castellanos men, all watching from behind the glass. Elena finally stepped back from the mirror. He looked disappointed, she said, as if we weren't supposed to be here. Sebastian guided his wife back to their bed, but I noticed he positioned himself so the mirror wouldn't reflect him directly. The will mentioned this, he admitted. There are conditions to inheriting this property, responsibilities we haven't fulfilled yet. What kind of responsibilities? Sebastian glanced at the mirror, then at his sleeping daughters. Room, the kind that explain why the mirror always turns to watch the children. The next morning, I found Sebastian in his grandfather's study, reading through manila folders marked with years spanning 6 decades. Legal documents, property records, and what appeared to be family correspondence written in Spanish. His grandfather's handwriting filled margin notes on nearly every page. My family's wealth comes from real estate development, Sebastian explained, not looking up from the papers. But not just any development. My great-grandfather specialized in acquisitions that other developers couldn't manage, properties with histories that made them difficult to sell. He handed me a photograph from 1972. It showed the Oceania building under construction, but in the background stood an older structure being demolished. A small colonial mansion with distinctive arched windows and a red tile roof. That was the Herrera family home, Sebastian continued. They'd lived on this exact spot for over a century. When my great-grandfather wanted to build here, they refused to sell. Not at any price. I studied the photograph. The mansion looked well-maintained, hardly the kind of property that would typically be condemned for development. Oh, what happened to them? The Herrera family had 3 daughters, 8, 9, and 11 years old. One morning in August of 1971, all 3 girls were found drowned in Biscayne Bay. The investigation concluded it was an accident, a sailing trip gone wrong. But the Herreras knew better. Sebastian's hands were shaking as he turned the pages. Well, after the funeral, they couldn't afford to fight the legal challenges anymore. They sold the property for exactly 1/4 of its market value. And your great-grandfather built the Oceania on their land, on their daughter's grave site. Sebastian pulled out a document I recognized as a property deed, but with unusual clauses typed in small print along the margins. The language was formal, legal, but the conditions were unlike anything I'd encountered in 27 years of estate management. The mirror came with the property, Sebastian said. It was the only thing the Herrera family requested to keep when they sold. But they couldn't take it. According to the sale agreement, it had to remain in the master bedroom of whatever structure was built here. I read the clause aloud. The reflecting glass shall maintain its position facing the primary sleeping quarters, ensuring constant observation of any children residing on the premises. At the time, my great-grandfather thought it was a harmless eccentricity. Sebastian continued. Old Cuban families are superstitious. He agreed to the terms because it seemed like a small price to pay for acquiring the most valuable oceanfront property in Bal Harbour. But it wasn't harmless. My grandfather's journals document every incident. The mirror turns whenever children sleep in this penthouse. It shows reflections of people who died decades ago. And sometimes, Sebastian's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes the children in the reflection don't match the children in the room. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the penthouse's air conditioning. What do you mean? 3 years ago, when my cousin brought his family to stay here, his daughter Emily saw 3 other little girls in the mirror, playing behind her, beckoning her to come closer. Sebastian closed the folder. Emily asked if she could go swimming with her new friends. I spent that afternoon reviewing the building's historical records in the Oceania's management office. The property manager, Mrs. Chen, had been with the building since its opening in 1973. When I mentioned the Herrera family, her expression changed immediately. "You're working for the Castellanos family," she said. It wasn't a question. "The mirror," I said carefully, "in their penthouse. Do you know its history?" Mrs. Chen locked her office door before responding. "In 46 years of managing this building, I've never spoken about what I know. But if you're dealing with that mirror, you need to understand what you're facing." She pulled out a file cabinet key from her desk drawer and retrieved a folder marked Confidential Building Incidents. Every family that's lived in that penthouse has reported the same phenomena. The mirror turns. Children see things. And within 6 months, something tragic happens to a child in the family. The file contained photocopies of incident reports dating back decades. The Morrison family in 1978. Their son fell from the 42nd floor balcony. The Valdez family in 1985. Their daughter disappeared during a family vacation in Key Largo. Her body never recovered. The Richardson family in 1992. Their twin boys died in a car accident while being driven to school. Only the Castellanos family has managed to avoid tragedy, Mrs. Chen said. Sebastian's grandfather figured out how to manage the situation. How? By giving the mirror what it wants. Which is, Mrs. Chen's voice was barely audible. Recognition, acknowledgement, and an annual remembrance of what happened to the Herrera girls. That evening, I accompanied Sebastian to the penthouse's library, where he retrieved a small wooden chest from behind a collection of first edition books. The chest was locked with an ornate brass key that he wore on a thin chain around his neck, something I'd noticed before but assumed was merely jewelry. Inside the chest were 3 items: a faded photograph, a handwritten letter, and a small silver locket. The photograph showed 3 young girls in white dresses, standing on what I recognized as the original Herrera property's front porch. Their names were written on the back in careful script: Carmen, aged 8, Isabel, aged 9, Esperanza, aged 11. My grandfather received this from Mrs. Herrera before she moved away, Sebastian explained. Along with this letter? The letter was dated September 15th, 1971, written in Spanish. Sebastian translated as he read, "Mr. Castellanos, you have built your fortune on my daughters' graves." The mirror belonged to my grandmother, brought from Cuba in 1896. It has always shown us our dead, so we might remember them properly. Now it will show you yours, until you remember mine. The silver locket contained a small curl of dark hair and a piece of paper with 3 names and birth dates, written in the same careful script as the photograph. Every year on August 23rd, the anniversary of their deaths, my grandfather performed a remembrance ceremony, Sebastian said. Then he would place fresh white roses in front of the mirror and speak their names aloud. Carmen Herrera, Isabel Herrera, Esperanza Herrera. And if he didn't, the mirror would turn, and children would start seeing things that shouldn't be there. Sebastian's grandfather had died on February 5th. The annual remembrance ceremony should have taken place on August 23rd, 2018, 6 months before the old man's death. According to Sebastian's calculations, This would be the first mist ceremony in 48 years. My grandfather's health had deteriorated significantly by then, Sebastian explained. He was in hospice care, barely conscious. I didn't know about the ceremony. He never told my father about it, and my father died in 2012 without learning the family's obligations. This explained why the mirror had remained stable for 3 weeks after I started managing the property. The supernatural activity hadn't begun immediately upon the grandfather's death. It had started in March, precisely 8 months after the mist ceremony. Well, what happened to Emily? I asked, remembering Sebastian's cousin's daughter who had seen the 3 girls in the mirror. Sebastian's jaw tightened. She survived. Barely. During their visit, she started sleepwalking at night, always toward the master bedroom. My cousin would find her standing in front of the mirror, talking to someone. When they asked her who, she said she was talking to her new friends who wanted to show her their swimming place. The family had left the penthouse immediately, but Emily's behavior continued for months afterward. She would draw pictures of 3 girls underwater, surrounded by fish and coral. She spoke frequently about visiting the pretty place under the water, where her friends were waiting. She nearly drowned in their swimming pool at home, Sebastian said quietly. Twice. They had to move to Arizona, somewhere far from any body of water. I understood now why Sebastian had seemed so reluctant to move his own family into the penthouse. His twin daughters, Sofia and Lucia, were the same age Carmen Herrera had been when she died. The mirror's interest in children wasn't random. It was seeking specific targets that matched the original victims. Why didn't you sell the property? I asked. We tried. Twice. Both times, the sale fell through at the last moment. Legal complications, financing issues, problems that made no sense. My grandfather believed the Herrera girls wouldn't let us leave until we fulfilled our obligation to remember them properly. Sebastian showed me his grandfather's detailed instructions for the annual ceremony. It was more complex than simply placing roses and speaking names. The ritual required specific Cuban white roses, arranged in 3 groups of 7, representing the years each girl had lived. The ceremony had to begin at exactly 11:30 p.m. and conclude at midnight. Most importantly, it had to be performed by a member of the Castellanos family, acknowledging responsibility for what their wealth had cost. And my daughters have been having dreams, Sebastian admitted. The same dream every night for the past week. They're swimming in very blue water, and 3 older girls are teaching them to hold their breath underwater for longer and longer periods. I felt a chill run through the penthouse's climate-controlled air. Have you told them about the mirror? About what happened here? They're 8 years old, Sebastian said. How do you explain to children that their inheritance is built on other children's graves? Maybe, I suggested carefully, by showing them how to honor those who came before. That night, I remained in the staff quarters again, monitoring the security cameras focused on the mirror. Sebastian had decided to perform the remembrance ceremony 3 days early, on August 20th, hoping to appease whatever force was causing the mirror's behavior. But first, he wanted to document exactly what was happening. At 2:47 a.m., the cameras captured something that made my hands tremble as I watched the live feed. The mirror's surface began to shimmer, not like reflected light, but like water disturbed by movement beneath. Shapes moved within the glass, not reflections of the empty bedroom, but images of somewhere else entirely. 3 young girls in white dresses stood in what appeared to be an underwater garden. Coral formations surrounded them, and tropical fish swam between their outstretched arms. The girls were beckoning toward the camera, their mouths moving as if speaking, though no sound penetrated the glass. Then Sophia appeared in the bedroom doorway, walking with the measured pace of someone still asleep. She approached the mirror and placed her small palm against its surface. The glass rippled like water at her touch. I radioed Sebastian immediately. By the time he reached the master bedroom, Sophia was standing inches from the mirror, her reflection mingling with the images of the 3 Herrera girls. They appeared to be teaching her something, showing her how to move her arms in swimming motions, how to tilt her head back and close her eyes. Sophia, Sebastian whispered. afraid to startle her awake. His daughter turned slowly, her eyes still closed. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent that didn't belong to an 8-year-old girl born in Connecticut. "Papa, they want to show me the place where the water is always warm." Sebastian gently guided Sophia away from the mirror, but she resisted, pressing back toward the glass with surprising strength. Her sleepwalking episodes had never involved this level of awareness or purpose. When he finally managed to lift her, she continued reaching toward the mirror, whispering words in Spanish that she shouldn't have known. "Esperanza says the water doesn't hurt," Sophia murmured as her father carried her back to her room. "Carmen says it's like flying, but better. Isabel says I would like it there because there are no grown-ups to make rules." Elena was already awake when Sebastian placed Sophia back in her bed. Their daughter settled immediately, but continued speaking softly in her sleep. "They showed me the secret place under the building. The place where they live now. It's beautiful there, Mama. The fish are like rainbows." Sebastian and I returned to the master bedroom. The mirror had returned to its normal reflection, showing only the empty room and our own worried faces. But the experience had clarified something crucial. The mist ceremony wasn't just causing supernatural activity. It was creating an active invitation for Sophia to join the Herrera girls in whatever underwater realm they now inhabited. "Now we're performing the ceremony tomorrow night," Sebastian decided. "But I want you to research something first. Find out exactly where the girls' bodies were recovered in Biscayne Bay. I need to know if there's a connection between that location and this building." "What kind of connection?" "The kind that explains why Sophia keeps dreaming about a place underneath our home." The mirror remained still, but I could feel it watching us, waiting to see what we would discover. The following morning, I contacted the Miami-Dade County Archives to research the 1971 drowning incident. The original police reports had been digitized, along with Coast Guard rescue logs and newspaper coverage from that period. What I discovered made the supernatural activity at the Penthouse seem less mysterious and far more deliberate. The 3 Herrera girls had been found floating approximately 200 yards offshore from what is now the Oceania building's exact location. Their small sailboat had capsized during what the report described as unusually calm weather conditions. No distress calls had been made, and witnesses reported seeing the girls sailing competently just hours before the accident. Most disturbing was the Coast Guard's notation that the girls' bodies showed no signs of struggle or panic. Their lungs contained seawater consistent with drowning, but their peaceful expressions and relaxed body positions suggested they had gone underwater willingly, almost gracefully. The newspaper coverage included interviews with family friends who described the girls as excellent swimmers, trained from early childhood in the strong currents around Key Biscayne. The idea that all 3 would simultaneously panic and drown in calm, shallow water seemed impossible to everyone who knew them. But the most significant detail appeared in a supplementary Coast Guard report filed 3 days after the bodies were recovered. Divers had discovered the girls' sailboat resting on the ocean floor directly above what appeared to be structural foundations from a much older building. Preliminary examination suggests the remains of a late 19th century structure, possibly residential, located approximately 30 feet below current sea level. The Herrera family's original home hadn't just been demolished to build the Oceania. It had been constructed on land that was once underwater. I shared these findings with Sebastian over lunch at a private club in Coral Gables, away from the Penthouse and its watchful mirror. The news that their property sat above underwater ruins seemed to confirm his worst suspicions about his family's inheritance. "My great-grandfather knew," Sebastian said, staring at the Coast Guard reports. "What? He had to have known about the foundations when he acquired the land. Real estate developers always conduct underwater surveys before building on reclaimed oceanfront property." The implications were staggering. If the Castellanos family had deliberately built on a site where the original Herrera home's foundations lay submerged, the drowning of the 3 girls took on a different significance entirely. They hadn't died in a sailing accident. They had been drawn back to their ancestral home, now resting beneath the waves. "Sophia's dreams about the place under our building," Sebastian continued. She's seeing the original house. The one that existed before the land was filled and developed. I pulled out a 1968 aerial photograph I'd obtained from the city planning office. The image showed Bal Harbour before the Oceania's construction, when the Herrera property extended directly into Biscayne Bay. A wooden pier stretched from their backyard into deep water, and the house itself sat only 50 yards from the shoreline. Rising sea levels, I realized aloud. 1 hurricane damage, coastal erosion. By 1970, parts of their original property would have been underwater. And when my great-grandfather filled in that section to create more buildable land, Sebastian concluded, he buried their home beneath our foundation. Which means the mirror isn't just showing your daughter's reflections of the dead girls. It's showing them the way home. That afternoon, I arranged for a marine archaeology consultation through contacts at the University of Miami. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in underwater historical sites, agreed to review the Coast Guard's 1971 dive reports and conduct a preliminary sonar survey of the ocean floor beneath the Oceania building. Her findings were even more disturbing than I'd anticipated. The structure down there isn't just foundation stones, Doctor. Vasquez explained over speakerphone while Sebastian and I reviewed her sonar imagery. It's an intact colonial-era house, preserved in an air pocket created by the way your building's pilings were driven into the seabed. The sonar showed clear outlines of rooms, doorways, and what appeared to be furniture still positioned throughout the submerged house. Most remarkably, the structure showed no signs of deterioration that would normally occur after 50 years underwater. There's something else. Dr. Vasquez continued. My equipment detected movement inside the structure. Consistent patterns, as if something were moving through the rooms on a regular basis. Sebastian gripped the conference table. What kind of movement? The sonar patterns suggest 3 separate entities, moving together, always in the same formation. They appear to congregate most frequently in what would have been the children's bedroom area. I asked a question that Sebastian seemed afraid to voice. Is there any way to access the structure from above? Theoretically, yes. The air pocket means parts of the house remain dry. If someone knew exactly where to dive and had proper equipment, they could potentially swim down through the main entrance and surface inside the building. Someone, Sebastian whispered, or something trying to bring children down to visit. That evening, Sebastian's daughters began exhibiting behavior that went far beyond typical sleepwalking. Lucia joined Sofia in the nightly visits to the master bedroom mirror, and both girls started speaking fluent Spanish despite having no previous exposure to the language. Their conversations with the mirror grew longer and more detailed each night. Elena recorded one of these sessions on her phone. When we played it back the next morning, the girls' voices were clearly audible, but they were responding to questions and comments that weren't captured on the audio. They were having complete conversations with someone, or multiple someones, that only they could hear. Carmen wants to know if we can hold our breath for a full minute, Sophia said in the recording. Isabel says there are beautiful shells in their bedroom, Lucia added. She wants to give them to us as presents. Esperanza says the water isn't scary once you understand that you don't have to come back up. The most chilling moment came when both girls spoke in unison. They said Mama and Papa can come too, if they want. The house has room for everyone. Sebastian stopped the recording. They're not just inviting the children anymore. They want the entire family. That afternoon, I hired a private security firm to install motion sensors throughout the penthouse, particularly in the children's bedrooms and all areas between their rooms and the master bedroom. If Sofia and Lucia tried to leave their beds at night, we would know immediately. The ceremony is tomorrow night, Sebastian said. If acknowledging the girls' Mayumat deaths doesn't stop this, I'm moving my family out permanently. And if the supernatural activity follows them. Sebastian had no answer for that possibility. At exactly 11:15 p.m. on August 20th, Sebastian began the remembrance ceremony his grandfather had performed faithfully for 48 years. The ritual was more elaborate than I'd expected. involving not just the placement of Cuban white roses and the speaking of names, but specific movements and words in Spanish that had been passed down through the Castellanos family. Elena and the twins were staying at her sister's house in Coconut Grove for the night, leaving Sebastian and me alone in the penthouse with whatever spirits inhabited the mirror. I positioned myself in the hallway outside the master bedroom, monitoring the security cameras and recording everything on multiple devices. Sebastian arranged 21 white roses in 3 groups of 7 in front of the mirror. As he spoke each girl's name, Carmen Herrera, Isabel Herrera, Esperanza Herrera, he lit a candle and placed it beside their respective flower arrangements. The mirror's surface began to shimmer immediately, but not in the chaotic way I'd witnessed before. The movement was controlled, purposeful. Carmen Herrera, Sebastian said in Spanish, I acknowledge your life and your death. I acknowledge my family's responsibility for your suffering. The mirror's surface rippled, and for a moment, I saw a young girl in a white dress standing behind Sebastian's reflection. She appeared to nod, then gestured toward the other 2 empty spaces beside her. The Isabel Herrera, Sebastian continued, I acknowledge your life and your death. I acknowledge that your home lies beneath ours. A second girl appeared in the mirror, joining the first. When Sebastian spoke Esperanza's name, all 3 girls became clearly visible, standing together as they had in the original photograph. The 3 Herrera girls remained visible in the mirror throughout the ceremony, their expressions gradually shifting from watchful suspicion to something approaching peace. When Sebastian concluded the ritual by promising to continue the annual remembrance, they joined hands and began to fade from view. But before disappearing entirely, Esperanza, the eldest, stepped forward in the mirror's reflection and spoke directly to Sebastian. Her voice came through the glass clearly, carrying the accent and intonation of 1970s Miami Cuban Spanish. Your daughters have good hearts, she said, and we did not mean to frighten them. We have been alone so long, we forgot that some children belong with the living. Sebastian's hands trembled as he responded, Will you let them stay with their family? Yes, Esperanza replied. But you must understand, this building stands on our grave. Your wealth grew from our loss. The ceremony must never be forgotten again. I promise, Sebastian said. When my daughters will learn the ceremony, the remembrance will continue. Isabel stepped forward next. There is something else you must know. The place beneath your home, it is not empty. Our spirits dwell there, but we are not alone. Carmen, the youngest, spoke last. Other children have joined us over the years. The ones who fell from the balconies, who drowned in swimming pools, who disappeared during family vacations. The mirror calls to them when families forget that some debts can never be fully repaid. The 3 girls began to fade, but Esperanza's final words echoed clearly through the glass. Remember us, and we will protect your children from joining us. The mirror returned to normal, reflecting only Sebastian's exhausted face and the empty bedroom behind him. The morning after the ceremony, I arrived at the penthouse to find Sebastian sitting in his grandfather's study, surrounded by additional family documents I hadn't seen before. His face showed the exhaustion of a man who had spent the night processing revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about his inheritance. The mirror didn't move during the night, he reported. But something else happened. I found these papers in my grandfather's desk drawer, locked behind a panel I never knew existed. The documents dated back to 1973, 2 years after the Herrera girls' deaths. They included correspondence between Sebastian's great-grandfather and what appeared to be other wealthy families who had built properties on similar, acquired land throughout South Florida. The Morrison family, the Valdez family, the Richardson family, all the names Mrs. Chen had mentioned from the building's incident reports appeared in these letters. They weren't isolated tragedies. They were part of a pattern that stretched across decades and involved multiple properties built on land obtained through questionable circumstances. My great-grandfather wasn't just a real estate developer, Sebastian said quietly. He was part of a network of wealthy families who specialized in acquiring properties where tragedies had made land available below market value. They had a system. The letters revealed a disturbing business model. Identify properties where families had suffered losses, wait for financial desperation to set in, then acquire the land for development. The new buildings would house the wealthy families who had profited from others' misfortunes. But there were always complications, Sebastian continued. Children in these families died at unusually high rates. The letters discussed strategies for managing what they called inherited spiritual obligations. Among the correspondence, I found a letter dated December 15th, 1978, written by Sebastian's grandfather to a family named Morrison. The letter's contents explained why the remembrance ceremony had become so crucial to the Castellanos family's survival. The mirror phenomenon you describe matches our own experiences exactly. The letter read, Our spiritual consultant, a Santeria priestess recommended by the Herrera family before their departure, explained that when property is acquired through tragedy, the dead maintain claim over the land until their suffering is formally acknowledged. The spiritual consultant had designed specific rituals for each family, depending on the nature of the original tragedy. The Castellanos family's annual ceremony for the drowned girls was relatively simple compared to other families' obligations. The Morrison family in Penthouse B has to maintain a memorial garden on their balcony, Sebastian explained. Their son fell from that exact spot. The Valdez family had to donate anonymously to drowning prevention programs every year. The Richardson family relocated entirely after their twins died. They couldn't fulfill the requirements. What disturbed me most was a notation in his grandfather's handwriting at the letter's bottom. The children who die in these families don't disappear. They join the original victims, creating larger spiritual communities that become increasingly difficult to appease. This explained the three girls' final warning about other children joining them over the years. Every family tragedy in the building added to the spiritual debt that needed acknowledgement and remembrance. How many families are involved? I asked. Sebastian shuffled through the papers. According to these records, 17 buildings across Miami-Dade County, all built on tragedy, all housing the families who profited from that tragedy. That afternoon, Sophia and Lucia returned from their aunt's house, and the change in their behavior was immediately noticeable. The intense, dreamy focus that had characterized their recent interactions with the mirror was gone. They played normally, spoke only English, and showed no interest in visiting the master bedroom. But during dinner, Sophia made a comment that suggested the supernatural encounters had left permanent effects. "Mama," she said while cutting her fish carefully, "why didn't you tell us about the other little girls who used to live here?" Elena glanced at Sebastian before responding. "What other little girls, sweetheart?" "Carmen, Isabel, and Esperanza. They showed us their underwater house last week. It's very pretty, but they said we should stay with you and Papa because we belong up here, not down there." Lucia nodded seriously. "They said some children make the wrong choice and go to live in the underwater houses. But those children get sad because they miss their families." Sebastian set down his fork. "Do you remember what they looked like?" "They wore white dresses," Sophia replied. "And they had long dark hair like Abuela's old photographs. Esperanza was the tallest, and she told the others what to do. Carmen was my age, and she liked to swim the most. They wanted to teach us about holding our breath underwater," Lucia added. But when Papa did the candle ceremony last night, they said goodbye and told us they had to take care of other children who needed help finding their way home." Elena reached across the table to touch Sebastian's hand. "The ceremony worked. For now," Sebastian replied quietly. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Mrs. Chen requesting an immediate meeting regarding irregularities in the Oceania building's structural monitoring systems. When I arrived at her office, she presented me with engineering reports that made my hands shake as I read them. "The foundation sensors have been detecting movement in the submerged portions of the building," she explained. "Not seismic activity, structural movement that suggests the underwater ruins are somehow affecting the building's stability. The report showed that immediately following Sebastian's remembrance ceremony, the movement patterns in the submerged structure had changed dramatically. Instead of the random activity Dr. Vasquez had detected earlier, the sensors now recorded systematic movement that followed daily schedules. Every morning at 7:30 and every evening at 6:15, Mrs. Chen continued. The sensors detect what appears to be multiple entities moving through the underwater structure in organized patterns, as if they're following routines, maintaining the preserved house. The most remarkable discovery was that similar sensor readings appeared in other buildings throughout Miami-Dade County, specifically in the 17 buildings Sebastian's documents had identified as constructed on tragedy-acquired land. The entities aren't just in our building, I realized. They're in all the buildings built on properties where families suffered losses. Mrs. Chen nodded grimly. We've been monitoring this for 46 years without understanding what we were seeing. But after your employer's ceremony, the patterns became unmistakable. The dead aren't haunting these buildings, they're maintaining them. Maintaining them for what purpose? To ensure the families living above remember their obligations, and to provide refuge for any children who choose to join them. 6 months after the ceremony, I submitted my final report to Sebastian and prepared to transition the Penthouse management to a new estate manager. The supernatural activity had ceased entirely, but my research into the Miami-Dade Spiritual Debt Network had revealed information that made continuing in my position impossible. The 17 buildings weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic wealth acquisition strategy that had operated for over 50 years, involving dozens of prominent families and hundreds of properties throughout South Florida. The spiritual obligations weren't just individual family burdens. They were part of a larger supernatural ecosystem that maintained the balance between the living and the dead in areas where tragedy had been exploited for profit. Sebastian had decided to establish an annual fund, honoring all the families whose losses had contributed to the Castellanos' fortune. The remembrance ceremony would continue, but it would expand to acknowledge not just the Herrera girls, but every person whose misfortune had enabled his family's success. It's not enough, he admitted during our final meeting, but it's a beginning. Sophia and Lucia had returned to normal childhood routines, but they occasionally mentioned their underwater friends who visited in dreams to check on them. These dream visits were friendly, protective. The girls described feeling watched over rather than threatened, and they promised to keep other sad children from bothering us, Sophia explained to her father one evening. Because we remember them properly now. The mirror remained fixed in its original position, facing the bed. But sometimes, in the early morning light, I could swear I saw 3 small figures reflected in its depths, standing guard over the family that had finally acknowledged their existence. I left the Oceania building on February 28, 2020, exactly 1 year after beginning my management of the Castellanos penthouse. As I walked through the lobby for the final time, Mrs. Chen handed me a sealed envelope containing what she called closing documentation. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before. Sebastian's great-grandfather standing with 2 other men in front of the original Herrera house in 1971, just weeks before the girls' deaths. Behind them, barely visible in an upper window, 3 small faces watched from what had been their bedroom. Carmen, the Isabel, and Esperanza had been watching the men who would profit from their tragedy, even before it occurred. The photograph's reverse side contained a handwritten note in Spanish, translated in Mrs. Chen's careful script. Some debts span generations. Some silences speak louder than words. Some reflections show not what is, but what must be remembered. 6 months later, I received a Christmas card from the Castellanos family. Sophia and Lucia had drawn pictures of underwater gardens where friendly spirits helped lost children find their way home. Sebastian's note mentioned that the annual remembrance ceremony had grown to include other families in the building, creating a community acknowledgement of their shared spiritual obligations. The mirror, he wrote, remained peaceful but vigilant. I kept the card, along with all my documentation from the Harbour case, in a locked file cabinet in my new office in Denver. Sometimes, late at night when reviewing similar cases involving wealthy families and inherited tragedies, I would remember Esperanza's final words, "Remember us, and we will protect your children from joining us." In the world of luxury estate management, some properties require more than maintenance. They require remembrance.